So, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today to have an additional conversation about broadband. For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Richardson, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Executive Director of your Lumber River Council of Governments. And we're so delighted today to have Angie Bailey, who's the Director of the North Carolina Broadband Office, and other staff members from the State Broadband Infrastructure Office to join us to talk about where counties can go and municipalities can go with helping to get broadband infrastructure out within our communities. As you know, the COG has been engaged in a broadband study for about the past year and a half with ECC Technologies to assess where broadband is within our region and get a better handle on what our challenges are, where our opportunities are for broadband infrastructure. We're hoping today will help move us to that next step. You know, at the end of the study, and we finished our presentations with all 5 counties last evening with the one in Bladen. Part of what Jeff Brooks with ECC has been talking with you about is where can we go from here? What can counties and municipalities do to leverage that information that we've gathered over this past year and a half to help continue that investment in broadband? And we see the presentation today as that next step, that next opportunity. The broadband infrastructure team is going to talk with you about the GREAT grant program, the CAB program, and ARP, and some other initiatives that are going on that can help you leverage that information to help bring broadband here into our region. They're also going to be willing to take some questions and answers from you today. So please feel free to ask any questions that you may have. If you are joining us online, if you wouldn't mind letting us know in the chat box who you are and what community you represent, we would greatly appreciate it so we can get a record of attendance today. We are recording today's presentation so that we can share with some individuals that wanted to attend and are not able to attend with us today. But thank you again so much for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Angie and the staff at the Broadband Infrastructure Office.
Thank you, David. Thank you to the Lumber River COG for having us today. I'm sorry that we're not there in person. I know some of you all are in person, but we appreciate you letting us join remotely. I know that we have worked with you all, with the COG and with the local government members over the years. I think what's changing, of course, is that there's so much activity going on now with broadband. So we'll try to share, you know, we don't want to give information overload, but we've tried to pick out kind of the most relevant pieces for y'all today. So I'm Angie Bailey. I'm the Director of the Broadband Infrastructure Office. We are part of the North Carolina Department of IT. And if we can go to the next slide, please. And so our thought for today, I don't know if we'll need the whole hour and a half, but we want to make sure we have enough time for questions. I wanted to talk about a little bit about our Broadband Division and some changes we've had at the state level. As David mentioned, we want to focus on a couple of the key programs that are rolling out now for y'all to be aware of. We want to talk a little bit about mapping. We will probably have some additional mapping sessions offered through BIO, which y'all would be welcome to participate in the coming weeks. And then we want to leave time for questions. So that's the goal for this morning. I want to kind of mention my teammates that are with me today. George Collier is our infrastructure funding and policy lead. So he's kind of developing a lot of these ARPA programs for us, and he'll be speaking on the GREAT program. Jim Corin on our team is our state broadband liaison. You may have worked with both George and Jim in the past. And Jim will be working with the CAB program. And then Keith Conover is on, and his role is liaisoning with our broadband providers in the state. And then Elizabeth Daniel is joining us, and she is she's the GIS analyst for the Center for Geographic Information and Analysis, which is one of our partners. So they will all be on, and you're welcome. They will help in the Q&A as well. So next slide. please. So a little bit about some changes at the state level. You know, the bio office has been around since 2015 at NCDIT. Last summer, the governor created a new division of broadband and digital equity within the North Carolina DIT. And so we still have our bio office broadband, but we are now fully infrastructure focused. And then we have a new sister office called the Office of Digital Equity and Literacy, which was created last summer. And so their focus is kind of digital, more on the digital equity, affordability piece. And so we're working in tandem together. Our Nate Denny is our new Deputy Secretary of Broadband and Digital Equity. And so we're creating a fuller team and to better, I think the goal of creating the Office of Digital Equity and Literacy to make sure that we're addressing that side of the house, not just the availability side. So, you know, that's where we are now as an office and as a division. Next slide, please. And so our mission really is still expanding broadband access across the state, building a sustainable team to deliver digital equity. Our efforts are really ramping up with the ARPA dollars that are coming through. So we'll be talking about that today, obviously, you know, making sure that we're working on data-based solutions, right? And making sure we're identifying communities that really need attention and focus from our office and as far as and through these programs, enabling more North Carolinians to afford high-speed internet. Affordability is a key piece of a key focus of our division, and then increasing digital literacy. So that's our new division mission. Next slide, please. And so our success metrics, these are the success metrics we have for our division. And it's kind of looking at where we are today in North Carolina versus where we need to be. For example, households with broadband internet access, the 95% is in quotes because that's based on FCC data that we know is not granular. So what we would like to move to is a 98% that's actually real numbers. We obviously want to increase households with broadband internet subscription rates and make sure we have 100% of access and subscriptions for households with children. And as you all know, a lot of this, I've been in the broadband space for 20 years in North Carolina, but with the pandemic, there's been obviously new interest and new investments in solving this problem. Increasing adoption rates across racial subgroups is also a big focus. So those are some of our success metrics. Next slide, please. And so how are we going to do this? We do have you all may, obviously you all know as local governments, last March, Congress passed the American Rescue Plan Act. At the state level, those funds that come through at the state level have to be appropriated by the General Assembly. So those ARPA dollars that were appropriated to state broadband programs were passed in November with the state budget. And so those are the programs we're working to develop and roll out right now. Next slide, please. And so these are, there's just over $1 billion that has come through in the state budget with ARPA funds for broadband. So infrastructure is the big category with just over, it's actually 941 million in ARPA dollars. 30 of that is state funds. So we have 350 million in ARPA dollars for our new GREAT grant program. Y'all are probably familiar with GREAT. That's been our last mile broadband grant program since 2018. Essentially, and George Collier will be speaking to this, but the applicants are broadband providers, and we incent providers to build out to our unserved areas in the state. So that program was launched January 31st with ARPA dollars. There's a new program called Completing Access to Broadband, which we call CAB, and Jim Corum will be speaking about that. That's a $400 million pot of ARPA dollars. That will be a partnership with counties directly. So we want to make sure y'all are up to speed on that program. That is still somewhat under development. There's a $90 million pot for stopgap solutions, which will be kind of what are the areas that are left after we've made investments with Great, made investments with CAB. So that's stopgap. That won't roll out till more towards the end of the year. And then there's a pole replacement fund of $100 million, which is meant to provide reimbursements essentially to broadband providers, for telecommunications providers, as they have to replace utility poles to get to some of these more remote areas. There's also $1 million for broadband mapping. And so, Elizabeth Daniel will share some mapping information that we have now. There's always the challenge of the fact that the FCC data has traditionally been collected at the census block level. So we are working to get more granular household level data. There's a $50 million pot for awareness and digital literacy. That runs through our Office of Digital Equity and Literacy. Those programs are still under development, and then some administrative funding. So these are the immediate programs that we're working to develop. And let's see, next slide, please. Okay, yeah, sorry. And so just you all as local governments, I'm sure are familiar with the state and local fiscal recovery funds. So most of this funding comes from our state fiscal recovery funds, which is ARPA funding. The final rule for that money was just released on January 6th last month. And essentially, it's to build service to unserved and underserved areas in the state. You have to build to certain speed requirements of 100 down, 20 up, scalable to 100 symmetrical. So those pots of funding are funding our Great Grant program, part of our Great Grant program, our CAB program, our stopgap. And then there's also, and our pole replacement fund. There's another pot of funding from US Treasury that's called the Capital Project Funds. That's a set amount of, I think it's $273 million coming from US Treasury. That guidance was released September 20th, 2021. It's essentially for capital investments, but the General Assembly has appropriated that to the Great Grant program. And so that's the other pot of funding that we're working with. And I know that's a little in the weeds, but I know you all as local governments are familiar with, the fact that there's lots of rules and requirements around use of this money. And so we're trying to kind of, dig into the federal rules, also the state legislation, and keep the programs from being too complex, that we can actually get this money out reasonably quickly for all these folks that need access. Next slide, please. So before we dig into the Great Grant, I'm going to turn it over to George for that. I just wanted to kind of mention there is one other pot called the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Well, it's not a pot, it's a federal legislation that passed, I think, in November. And so that is going to place another $65 billion in broadband out there for the country. 48 billion of that is coming through the NTIA, which is part of the US Department of Commerce. And so if you hear, we don't want to, bog you down in too much information, but if you do hear about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act money, we are tracking that. Those notices of funding will be coming out generally in May from the US Department of Commerce. There's a fair amount in those pots around state broadband planning, digital equity planning. And so that will be kind of a first step. So I think it actually works well to give us time to kind of be working on the ARPA pot, see what areas are covered with ARPA dollars, be planning for, what else is left, and then we'll have access to this other Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Probably not it may not be till next year because of mapping requirements. So that's kind of the landscape. And I will turn it over to you, George, to talk about Great.
All right, thanks, Angie. So from what I heard just right then is that there is a ton of money coming down the pipeline for broadband type projects. And to your point, a lot of our focus right now in the state of North Carolina is around, our current Great Grant round that we opened on January 31st. Next slide, please. So we opened the current round of Great using the $350 million of federal ARPA dollars appropriated in Session Law 2021-180. That's the budget bill that was passed in November. The website reference here on this slide contains all relevant information about this round of GREAT, such as the guidelines, the FAQ document. We also recorded our information session from a couple of weeks ago, and we also provide directions for ISP applicants to access our online application portal. Next slide, please. Some of the highlights, or some highlights of our key provisions in the GREAT program, which we're calling the GREAT Grant Federal. The only legal applicant and recipient for GREAT grant funds are broadband service providers. The funds are to be used to build infrastructure to last mile unserved locations. There is a specific definition of an unserved area that's defined in our legislation and also in the guidance document. Essentially, these are areas that have less than 25 megabits download and 3 megabits upload speeds. The maximum grant award for any project is $4 million, and no combination of awards shall exceed $8 million in a single county per fiscal year. Next slide, please. So, since ISPs are the only legal applicant for these funds, the counties on the call or on this webinar, you're probably asking yourself, how can we participate in GREAT? The first way is to understand that projects must be located in an eligible economically distressed county. In section 38.4A of North Carolina Session Law 2021-180 defines an eligible economically distressed county. So a summary of this definition, I'm not going to read it word for word to you, but a summary of the definition is essentially a project located in a tier 1, 2, or rural census tract, tier 3 county using the calendar year 2021 tier system provided by the North Carolina Department of Commerce. Now, I will read this very long and wordy slide here. So the legislation for the GREAT grant and CAB program states that a county that has utilized federal funding for broadband infrastructure on or after May 1, 2021, with the exception of the funds for GREAT or CAB, is ineligible for these two state programs. Now, our interpretation of this legislation is that the counties that have used their local fiscal recovery funds from U.S. Treasury for broadband infrastructure projects are ineligible for the GREAT grant and CAB program. Now, our understanding of this intent from policymakers is to encourage counties to partner with the state on broadband infrastructure programs to best leverage available ARPA funds. Okay, so in essence, if any county has used their ARPA dollars that they receive directly from U.S. Treasury for any type of broadband infrastructure project on or after May 1st, you will not be able to participate in GREAT or CAB. With that being said, just to be clear, because we've been getting a lot of questions in our email inbox for GREAT and CAB, counties can participate in GREAT or CAB, and I'll talk GREAT or CAB, and I'll talk more about that county participation in GREAT here in the next slide. Next slide, please. So North Carolina General Statute 143B-1373 codified the GREAT program's defined scoring matrix, and section 38.4A of Session Law 2021-180 updated specific criterion in the scoring matrix, specifically for this current round of GREAT. One of the criterion is how an applying ISP can qualify for points if they enter into a partnership. An applying ISP can earn points if they enter into a partnership with a county by 1, using a county's infrastructure or other county-owned assets for the facilitation of broadband deployment, or 2, a financial contribution. And partnerships can impact scoring and match requirements for an ISP applicant. Next slide, please. So in this section, I'm going to review and highlight the current round of GREAT scoring and match requirements. Next slide, please. As I stated earlier, our scoring matrix is defined in our authorizing legislation. It's a very competitive scoring matrix. It's a sliding point scale. Legislatively, we are required to prioritize funding for the highest scoring projects. We'll review all applications from the ISPs and give the final score, and then we'll also verify the match requirement. Next slide, please. So this is just a highlight of the scoring criteria. And as I stated earlier, it is defined in our authorizing legislation. There are opportunities for our applicants to earn points in each one of these criterion. Now, we highlighted partnership points because an applicant can enter into a partnership with a county and can earn up to 4 points. And then depending on how much a county provides in the financial contribution, the ISP applicant can earn additional points in our program. Next slide, please. This is how we implement our scoring matrix. We have a number of criterion. We add up the scores to get an initial score, and then we multiply that score by a base speed multiplier. The base speed multiplier is assigned a value based on the speed that the applying ISP will commit to providing to all their proposed locations in their project. And then we'll get a subtotal score. Then using that subtotal score, we'll add in the additional points from our, if a applying ISP is working with a county that has implemented different parts of our community broadband playbook, and depending on, an applying ISP can earn additional points depending on the amount of the county match provided. Next slide, please. As I stated earlier, an ISP applicant score will determine their match requirement. An applicant can seek out assistance from a third-party funding source, and a county is considered a third-party funding source in our program. The program and the legislation states that an applicant may seek up to 50% of the required match from third-party funding or other grants. County ARPA funds and unrestricted general fund revenue are eligible sources. And as you can see here at the bottom of this slide, that's our sliding point scale depending on the score. This would be the amount of the match for our ISP applicants. Next slide, please. Section 38.4A of Session Law 2021-180 updated the program's match rules by potentially allowing a reduction in match for an applicant regardless of their score. So, if their county partner's financial contribution consists partially of ARPA funds, the ISP applicant could potentially have a 25% match. If their county partner's financial contribution consists entirely of ARPA dollars, there could be a potential reduction in match for the applicant down to 15%. So with all of that being said, I would just like to reiterate that the only legal applicant for the program is a broadband service provider, but a county could participate and assist that ISP applicant with their match requirements or satisfying a portion of their match requirements. So you do, as a county, have the authority to participate in GREAT. And I will turn it back over to Angie to introduce my co-worker that will talk about the completing access to broadband program.
Okay, thanks, George. Next slide, please. Okay, so now so that's the GREAT program. Again, I know it's a lot of information, but those are applicants and broadband providers, but you all have the opportunity to partner, enter into a partnership with those applicants. And that is happening now. That round is open. So the completing access to broadband is the next program we'll talk about. That is in progress. We're developing it in progress, meaning to be under development. And so Jim Corin on our team, who's our state broadband liaison, is going to talk a bit about CAB.
Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody is doing well today. I am going to see if this, well, not going to be able to get the video of me, but the most important part is what's on the screen. Completing access to broadband. This is the CAB program. This is a funding pot that's even bigger than GREAT. This is a $400 million funding, up to $400 million funding pot. It is considered a complementary program to the GREAT grants. Next slide, Sonia. Thank you. This is a partnership between the county and the North Carolina Department of Information Technology. A competitive bidding process will be developed or be developed. We want to mutually identify eligible, unserved areas. No county can receive more than $4 million in aggregate funding from the CAB program in a fiscal year. That's 400 in a fiscal year. Award must use county and state funds. The counties will transfer the funds to the state. The state provides program and fiscal oversight of the project. Now, tentative dates, we plan to award a pilot CAB program counties in the third quarter of this year. Sonia, next slide, please. Great, thank you. Here's next steps for anybody who's on this call and is interested in participating. Please complete the county survey from our office by February the 28th, and I believe that is next Monday. That was sent to you from CAB program at nc.gov. That's on our, please add that to your safe senders list. And please designate a primary contact who will coordinate with our office on the CAB program, the GREAT program, and the other upcoming infrastructure programs. And please, last comment, important comment, please participate in the GREAT grant and CAB program. Next slide, please, and next speaker.
Okay, thanks, Jim. And so again, so that note on the participating in GREAT and CAB, there is some confusing language in the legislation that talks about counties that have used federal funds for broadband after May 1st of 2021 are ineligible. Our interpretation, I'm simplifying a bit. Our interpretation is that counties can participate in both GREAT and CAB. And so we just wanted to, state that. So the foundation, as you all know, having been working with David and the COG on broadband for many years, foundation of all these infrastructure investments is mapping, because there's this policy concept that we shouldn't be using public dollars to invest in areas that already have some type of broadband service. So it's figuring out where our unserved areas really are, what speeds, and that type of thing. And so we do have a fair amount of, we do partner with our Center for Geographic Information and Analysis team with CGIA, which is part of NCDIT. And they have created a huge array of data and resources for us, which live on NC1 Map, which is our state GIS resource. And so I believe that Elizabeth Daniel is on.
Hey, Angie. Yeah, good morning. I'm on. Sorry.
Okay, super. And Elizabeth is going to talk to us a bit about mapping. Thanks, Elizabeth.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm actually going to try to do a live demo to show you at least two of these applications you see on this slide. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So right here, you're actually viewing the main landing page for NC1 Map. And this is kind of our authoritative collection of data and web services for North Carolina. And we've organized a lot of the data into some of our main projects. So if you go up to the upper right under data projects, I'm going to go ahead and move to the broadband page. And this is kind of lists all the resources that we are working on for broadband. We've got the link to the Broadband Infrastructure Office, so you can go directly to their website. This morning, I'm going to spend most of the time talking about our broadband planning tools and specifically highlighting these first two. But we've got three listed here. We've got an NC GREAT Grant online mapping tool, and this tool is mainly for providers. It's designed to help them select potential eligible areas for the GREAT Grant. We also have the center dashboard that's for project planning, and that's geared more towards counties and local municipalities. It's designed to kind of help you identify areas for potential grant funding. And then this third dashboard is our NC broadband survey dashboard. And this is designed to kind of highlight our broadband survey responses from across the state. And we use this survey information to gather data on locations in the state without adequate internet and access or speeds. So to view these applications, you simply click on the view button. But before we go in depth into this first one, I do want to mention, if you click on the data, you're able to actually see the underlying data for each of these applications. And then you can actually download the data and bring it into your own online mapping tools or GIS systems if you have that. So that's good to remember. I'm going to start with a quick overview of this great grant tool. And I already have it pulled up. Let's go ahead and... So there's a lot of data on here. Again, this tool is mainly designed for our providers. Our goal was to give them enough information to help them figure out what areas were potentially ineligible for funding, as well as highlight areas that may be eligible for funding. These gray areas that you see, these are previous great grant funding areas. It also includes some other ineligible areas. We've also included, you can see these kind of reddish areas, the FCC data on the speed availability within that census block. If you zoom into a particular county, and we're going to pick Robinson, you can begin to see some more additional data. These blue areas are showing previous great grant rounds that were granted. And as you continue to zoom in, you can actually start to see these yellow dots, or the actual address level data that the providers will be selecting to submit for grant applications. And we are really lucky in North Carolina that we actually have an authoritative addresses for the entire state. And we really want to thank our next Gen 911 participants, so our PSAPs and local municipalities and counties, because they are the ones responsible for providing us this data. And this is really helpful because it really helps us target the areas that the providers are wishing to fund. So that's kind of a brief overview of the dashboard for our that our providers are using. I'm going to go ahead and move over to our broadband planning dashboard. And again, this is title kind of tells you everything. We're trying to give you enough information for you to kind of see where broadband's lacking in your area and where you might want to ask for additional funding. So I think the best way to kind of look through this dashboard is I'm going to go up to the county filter, and you can either select from the drop down or type in. I'm going to go to Bladen County, and you can see it zooms us into the county. And on the right hand side, I don't know if you've noticed, we actually now have a list of all of the providers that are found within that county. And if you actually click on, I'm going to click on the Bell South, and it'll zoom you into those areas that they are providing service. Let's go ahead and see CenturyLink. So you can see it kind of lets you know what's available, what providers are available within your area. The other layer that I want to highlight really quickly at this level, so the provider level data we derived from the FCC 477 data. We also derive this technology summary layer from that same FCC data. And basically what this layer is showing is we pick the fastest technology available within a census block and use that to display. So you're seeing here, these green areas are the faster technology. These census blocks have a faster technology available, such as fiber. These reddish areas have a lower speed available technology, such as DSL. As you zoom in, you can also see we've got some other additional data that may be helpful. These blue dots are actually our previous great grant awarded address areas. We've also included, you can see these reddish and yellow dots, our survey response data. The red dots represent no internet service, and these yellow areas recommend reported service of under 25.3 is the fastest, or under 25.3. So again, the goal of this dashboard was to provide enough data to kind of help begin to get a picture of broadband availability within your county. And I don't have enough time today to actually review the survey dashboard. So if you guys have any questions, you're more than welcome to contact us through NC1 Map, the contact page, or through Angie. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Angie.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth.
All right. And I think I should have. All right.
Thank you. So again, I know the mapping gets fairly complex, but we wanted to touch on it. It is a really important piece. So let's go to the next slide, I think. And then one more, please. So I know we've kind of gone through the information quickly. It's a lot, so we want to kind of touch on the high points. For the CAB program, we ask people to please send questions to cabprogram@nc.gov. We're trying to collect questions all in one place to make sure that we're responsive and getting out, but being consistent in our answers and providing written answers. And actually, besides that, I meant to say, if you go to our website at ncbroadband.gov/grants, there's a listing of all of these programs and kind of a short summary of each one. So please take a look at that site. Mapping questions specifically, we're asking to please send them to broadbandmapping@nc.gov. That goes to Elizabeth and Ben Shelton on our CGIA team. And then great grant questions, we ask you to please send a great grant at nc.gov. And so that's kind of where we are right now. We're trying to, some of this information may sound redundant to you if you participated in some of our other sessions. We did some office hours with School of Government last week and participated on a county manager call with the Association of County Commissioners. Both groups have been super partners in this. We were really kind of leaning on them to help provide advice and guidance to counties on how to participate or whether to participate. So they've been really important partners. We do actually have a county information session today from 12 to 1. Again, if you're on this call, it would be redundant with what we've shared right now. But if you have other folks from your local governments that you think would benefit from attending, or we'll be recording that session as well and posting it on our site. But I did make notes of a couple quick things I wanted to kind of just summarize. As George mentioned in his session or in his slides, there's language in the great legislation around eligible economically distressed counties and which counties can participate. And so again, this is in the legislation. Didn't come from our office, but there is language that if counties have spent their own federal money, really meaning the local fiscal recovery fund dollars on broadband infrastructure projects after May 1st of last year, then those counties are restricted from participating in CAB awards. I'm sorry, in great awards or participating in CAB. And again, I think that as George mentioned, I think the policymakers in the state were thinking that, trying to push counties to participate in the state programs to leverage the state dollars with local dollars. So just to be aware, and this is something the School of Government has done a session on, is kind of the options for counties with participating in GRATE and CAB, or there's kind of a go it alone option that School Government has outlined where, counties do have authority, and I'm sorry, I don't have a slide on this, under General Statute 153A-459. That's the county's authority to provide broadband infrastructure grants. So there is that route for counties that don't want to participate in the state programs for you all to provide incentives. There are still restrictions in that language around unserved areas and what's unserved. And then there's kind of also the route of counties using their local fiscal recovery fund dollars to go it alone on broadband projects without participating in the state programs. And again, we would ask you to, rely on School Government or the association for advice on those routes. I think the balance, right, is just with this federal money, it's a lot, there's a lot of requirements. And so just kind of making sure that you're following the path that's best for your local government. what else did I want to add? I also just wanted to add that, you know, something that's very different about this federal money is that because of the federal rules, which has been different than our traditional rate grant program, these projects do have to be scalable to 100 meg symmetrical in what they're delivering. And that has to be provided. There's also language around speeds being provided in a reliable way. And so, you know, applications that we see that come through that can't deliver those speeds will be considered ineligible. So just to say the types of projects we're seeing may be a bit different than in past. So I think that's, you know, these are important investments for the state. Can we go to one more slide, please? So I think this is our final slide, and just to kind of, and the COG may want to jump in and we can get to go to questions, but you know, I know that through the COG's leadership, you all have done a lot of work around broadband infrastructure planning over the past year or two and survey work to kind of understand where your counties are. So we really, you know, commend you on those efforts and your work with your federal granting agencies that have helped with that. And so I think that how that's going to be most relevant for the Great Grant Program, to be honest, since the broadband providers are the applicants, I think the main opportunity, I think over that time, I think you've probably forged some relationships with broadband providers. The broadband providers are really going to need to be wanting to come to you to submit applications for your counties, your areas. And so those relationships are really important. And again, the partnership piece for Great, the goal that the providers have is that if y'all partner, they can get higher scores and then they can get reduced match, which then allows them to really submit more applications, hopefully. So that's kind of the great side. Again, I think where your infrastructure work and your survey work will come in is more along the CAB program and your digital inclusion plans, because that's really where we'll be partnering with you all as counties on these competitive bids for your county to figure out what areas do we need to build to and what does that look like. And so the data that you've collected so far will be really useful as we get more into the CAB work. So and David has shared with me the studies that ECC completed for you all. So we appreciate y'all sharing those, and we look forward to digging into those more with you. I thought of one other quick thing, and then we'll turn it over to questions. As far as towns that may be on the call today, we would, you know, I know we're talking about, we use the term counties, but to be honest, these projects are around unserved areas. And so if you have a town that's unserved with broadband, that would be an eligible area, just as any, you know, geographic area within the county itself. So if you're a town that you feel like you have unserved areas, we would suggest that you be partnering either with a broadband provider directly to say, hey, this area is unserved, or with your county, ideally, to make sure that those areas get captured. And we also have our NC Broadband Survey that collects data on unserved households and businesses. And so that would be a great way to capture your locations that are unserved as well. So I think that's what I have for now. Does anyone from the bio team have anything that we're leaving out, or otherwise we'll just open it up to questions? Okay.
Angie,
Yeah.
bio staff, thank you so much. Do we have questions here in the room or questions online from folks? Well, I am not hearing any, so Angie, thank you so much. Thank you all for being with us this morning. We greatly appreciate it. We will make sure we get the information out. We have recorded the session. We'll make that available, if that's okay with you, to other members through our newsletter, along with the slide handout, Angie.
Yes, that would be super. And also, you know, if you can push any folks to our website for our grants pages, that's where we're posting information because there's such a kind of large scale effort that's going on at the moment. We don't want to miss people, so we're trying to utilize our website for postings more than we may have in the past. So that's where we'll be posting our sessions as well.
We will definitely do that. And I will also say, for those of you who are joining us from the county, we are anticipating the final report in the GIS data we will get in our hands later this week or first thing next week. And we will get those out to our county managers and our county IT directors just as soon as we have that data in our hands, so that you have it as you're looking to plan for great grant applications and CAB applications and moving forward. We'll make sure to get that out to all the counties, municipalities. If you would like that as well, please let us know, and we're happy to get it out to you. I know the reports are about 500 pages in length. So they're long reports. They're good reads, so they've got lots of great data in them. And I do think they will be really beneficial to you. And then we've got the GIS information that's coming as well. That we're going to have to figure out more how we're going to share it just because of the volume of that data. And we've got some ideas here at the COG that we're working on to get that out. Unless there's any questions, thank you all again for being with us this morning. Angie, thank you to you and the NC Bio team for taking the time to be with us. We greatly appreciate it. We know this is a very important issue in our region, and we really want to do everything we can here at the COG to help move us forward when it comes to broadband infrastructure.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having us on.
Thank y'all.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Y'all have a great day. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.